Now there are three different schools of Buddhism. There's the Lessor or the Theravada vehicle. There's the Mahayana that's called the greater vehicle. And there's the Tantrayana or Vajrayana that's the esoteric vehicle. And what's important to realize is you don't have those Russian dolls kind of stacked inside. All but the other two, the Vajrayana and the Mahayana, they're based in the Lessor or Theravada. And that goes on top. The reason it's called the lesser vehicle is that doesn't mean that it is less than or not as good as, but the only thing that it really focuses on is the Pali Canon. And the Pali Canon is what the Buddha is said to have said. And that's all they really, really base their tradition upon. The Buddha, when he said things, they didn't record it on paper for 600 years. And what they had was people that would memorize it. This your job is you're going to memorize this sutra and practice, make sure you know it for the rest of your life, and then you find two people that you make sure they know it. And this is what they did tell the Sixth Council, and that was 600 years ago. Yeah, there is some similarities. There definitely is some similarities about it. The Theravada vehicle is very conservative. It only deals with basically, meditation and serious study. And what's also a little bit interesting is now in the West, people that are involved with Theravada Buddhism, they get a little bit more attention. When the Buddha was teaching, you either had to become a monastic to get the full teachings, and people, they would support the Sangha, which we'll talk a little bit more about these words in a minute. They didn't get to hear all the good stuff. They just, did things, fed the monks, cleaned the temples, helped build the temples. So Buddhism is based on the teachings of somebody that was named Siddhartha Gautama. He was a prince, and he was born between 27 to 2,500 years ago. We're not real sure on the details. He was definitely not born in India. He was born in Lumbini, Nepal. And he was born in a very, very royal Hindu family. His father, and I always butcher his name, Suadana. He was the king or the leader of what was called the Sakya clan. His mother was Maya, and she died. There's a little discrepancy. It's either she died when he was born or she died 10 days after he was born. And his aunt, who's going to play a very pivotal role in women becoming involved with Buddhism, she's the one that raised him. And it was a very, very popular thing for a king when their son, especially their son, was born. They would bring in as many Brahmin, or they would be considered like priests and psychics, to tell what's going to go on with this kid. So his father was very, very interested because this was something. The son was, it was a surprise. So 8 of them came. 7 of them said he's going to be a renowned world leader, or he's going to become a major religious figure. The 8th person, and he was the youngest of the little psychic people, he said, oh, no, he's going to become an enlightened being. And everybody laughed at him because at that point in time, the thought of an enlightened being was completely out of the question. That's something, that was a big daydream. But his father was not happy about this. His father wanted a king to take, his throne when he was gone. So he kept him extremely shuttered and closed off, cloistered. Thank you. I'm going to point to you for help once in a while.
I've heard a little of this throughout
But
the years.
Dad did not want him to go out and see people. He lived a very, very sheltered life. Now they tried to, in some of the sutras, they tried to give you this impression that the Buddha did not. We got somebody else. Okay. That the Buddha didn't really go outside of the palace until he was 29. I don't really believe that. I think that sometimes we get some of our stories that can be, sometimes they're more metaphorical than they are actual truth. But what I do think is that he never could understand old age, sickness, and death. As a Hindu, he obviously believed in reincarnation, but he was thinking, why would you come back when the 3 things, only one for sure is death. If you're lucky, you might get a little old age, and maybe the sickness won't be so bad. But he was saying, why would somebody continually come back for old age, sickness, and death? And, his father wasn't interested in talking to him about it. When he was 16, he was married in an arranged marriage, and he had a son when he was 18. Just come on in. when he was 29, he decided that he did not like all this wealth. He knew there had to be something there. He did not want to be a ruler or a king. He never was that comfortable with money in the first place, living the way that he did. He wanted to go out and see and do things. So when he was 29, he basically decided to do what people would do there if they wanted to be a religious figure. You renounce everything and you go out and become an ascetic. So in the middle of the night, he took off. Wife and kids had no idea. Dad had no idea. He told one person, so don't come looking for me because you won't find me. So then he decided, and the ascetic, basically what you did is you had a bowl, you had a robe, and you meditated. Let's get to the other slide here. There's very many parallels to all of these stories. The thing about it is, though, is this story predates most of the others. So he found two very renowned teachers. They were considered, they were a little bit different than the Hindu, and they had something kind of unique. And he studied with them, and he mastered in 6 months what most people it took 8 years to master. And one person said, we'd sure like to have you, lead this. You're better than me. He said no, and the second one, same thing happened. But he wasn't getting far enough, He mastered this thing, but it was like, there's more, there's something out here, and I don't quite know what it is, but I think I'm getting closer. So he found five friends, and it was kind of comical about how they would try to outdo one another. The Buddha, the Prince Siddhartha, he wasn't the Buddha then. He was not that interested in playing the games. But then somebody came up with a wonderful idea of let's be, the suffering ascetic. Let's go really hardcore. We're going to try to live on one nut a day. We are going to sleep on, rocks. We will only sleep an hour. And it's a miserable existence. And the truth of the matter is about 80% of the people that tried that died. And these 5 weren't doing very well themselves. Their hair starts falling out. You lose your teeth. And he was in pretty bad shape. And he went into a river to take a bath. And he was very lucky there was this young girl that, she knew that this guy looked like he was 85, 90 years old trying to get in the water, and he about died. He about passed out, and she dragged him to the shore, and she gave him milk and honey. And she said to him, she said, why would you do this? You're going to die. What good is that going to do? And there was one thing, and this doesn't get told about in too many of the stories, but when he told her that, he recalled his most precious moment of his childhood that meant the most to him. He would go when he was about 4 or 5, and he would sit underneath a tree, and he would have these friends that they were his ants, little ants on the ground. And it was just like he didn't have a lot of people to hang out with, and his ants were his friend. And one day they came and they plowed the earth, and the ants were dead or gone. And he felt this incredible sense of compassion. And that stuck with him. For that minute, when that girl said that to him, that stuck in his mind. There's something with that. So, the 5 buddies of his, he went, he had the milk and honey, and he was kind of getting a little better, and they were really mad. They called him a loser, nothing to do with you. You can't follow through. But he decided, it's called the Bodhi tree, but at the time it was actually a fig tree. And he decided, I've got this, at least this part figured out. You can have more riches than you know what to do, and you're miserable. And you can have absolutely nothing, and you're miserable. So why don't we try to find something in the middle? And that's why for a long time it was never called Buddhism. It was called the Middle Way. So he decided he was going to sit underneath. And this, by the way, is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's favorite statue of the Buddha. This is pretty much what he looked like before he went to sit underneath the Bodhi tree. Now, it's one of these things, again, he either sat there for 3 days or 49 days. There's, some that are 3 days, some of the 49 days. The Tibetan tradition is definitely going to go with the 49 because that's how many days you spend in the bardo after you die. They believe there's some things that go along with that. And he sat there, and he decided, I'm not moving until I've got this figured out. And by the way, I kind of like these historical things, especially when they've been preserved. This is, beyond a doubt, the actual place the Buddha was enlightened at. The tree is no longer there. There was another tree, but that is the very spot. And if you go to Bodh Gaya, that's one of the most precious sites there. While he was sitting underneath this tree, you might have heard the story about Mara and the demons. Mara, some traditions, they want to look at it figuratively as, this like black wizard that was sending temptation to him. I'm more of the school that while he was sitting there, he started to think about different things. Well, maybe, the wife, maybe this, temptation, maybe I shouldn't do this, good, bad, or indifferent. But the most important thing about the story of the Buddha's enlightenment is you see right there when he touches, he's having all these things going through his mind, and he touched his hand to the ground. And that's when it stopped. And at that moment, he became an enlightened being. Now, after he was enlightened, his first choice was, this is not anything people are going to understand. This is difficult. It's easy, but it is difficult at the same time. And when you talk about emptiness, you kind of get what he was saying about that. But I think I'm going to keep this to myself. But his five little friends, they took one look at him, and the difference, there is things what is called the marks of the Buddha. I think for this discussion, he looked like his old self. He gained everything back. This enlightenment made him seem a little bit irradiated. And they knew something was up. And they were like, we followed you. We were the gang of six, and you something you've got. We want to know what this is. And he said, okay, I will teach you what I know. And he took them to Vulture's Peak, and he sat down, and it's called, we're going to go to the Noble Truths first, because that's what the teachings are. The first turning of the Dharma, you heard the turning of the Dharma wheel. There's 4 turns to the Dharma wheel. The first is the Four Noble Truths. And this is the core, fundamental teaching of the Buddha. But before we get to that, the Buddha lived till he was 80 years old. And what he did is he created what was called the Sangha, and that is the religious, like the Buddha family. Now today, if you join, you go to certain groups, like she goes to a thing, and then I go to a couple of the places I go to. Your group is called the Sangha. And you're there when we get later to the refuge prayer. The Sangha is there for you. They are like your religious community, your religious brothers and sisters. There's the Buddha who's the teacher, there's the Dharma that's the teachings, and then there's the Sangha, because the refuge prayer, and we will get more into that a little later, but you take refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha. And for the Theravada, they consider the word Buddha means enlightened being. The other 2 schools, they consider it, we'll get to that, how they define the word Buddha. But when he was 80 years old, about 80, I think he was 86, or 80 and 6 months. And he gathered everybody around, and he said, today I'm going to die. And I'm going to get some meat from somebody, and I'm going to get really sick, and I don't want you to get mad at this person. I've been here, I've taught you, and one of the things he said is, I've taught you some things, but there's more teachings than there are leaves in the forest, and I've taught you just a few. But he wanted to make sure that before he died, that everybody got to ask their questions. I want you to, if you have any questions or any comments, I want to know right now. And the last thing the Buddha said, he said, all composite things pass away. Strive for your liberation with diligence. And diligence is something that we're going to be talking a lot about. And sometimes the Dalai Lama's been talking a lot about diligence, and how diligence, while we don't like it, diligence is truly your friend. And this is actually another one of these historical places. This is the actual place the Buddha died. And you see, if you ever see the reclining Buddha, that's basically just before he checks out. That's where he's at. So, the first noble truth, and there's 4. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. And the thing that the word and you got to understand, the Buddha spoke Magde, which was translated into Pali. which was translated into Sanskrit, which was translated into an Asian language for wherever country they went to, and then it was translated into English. And English is one of the worst languages for Dharma, that it doesn't fit really well. And so what the Buddha used the term for suffering was dukkha. And suffering can be literally suffering like you're dying of cancer. It can be illness. It can be anxiety. It can be stress. And what he said is the truth, the noble truth of dukkha. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Lamenting and sorrow, pain and grief, despair, there's suffering. Union, what is pleasing, is separation. It's suffering. Separating what is pleasing is dukkha. Not getting what you want. In brief, and what we'll talk about 2 classes later when we talk about emptiness, who you think you are is really not even close. You're made up of what the Buddha said are 5 aggregates, and we will get to that. It's like you're 5 things swirling around, and the collective consciousness has decided to say, if we see those things this way, we see a person. But that's one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute. But the thing about it is that suffering and dukkha, I think it's best to look at it as stress, anxiety, and general dissatisfaction. You know, and in truth, there's some truth to this. No matter how much you have, eventually you're dissatisfied. You want more. Well, not quite, because what we're going to be talking about is the reason this not understanding this noble truth. It's not just about the pain, but he's going to tell you why your life is dissatisfied, why things don't make a lot of sense. But the first thing you have to know is what he's saying in a nutshell. And, you know, this is part of why he didn't want to really talk about this, is, you know, guess what? Life is depressing. It's not going to always be depressing. But life in itself, the only thing you can really count on is death, old age, and sickness. And he's not saying that you will never be happy. But what he's saying is there will always be some sense of dissatisfaction. And when we get to, after this truth, we're going to talk more about why. That's the second noble truth. But just for a second, if you can think just for yourself, you don't have to write this down or anything like that, but can you relate to any of this?
Well, I mean, there's always something in your life that you're not happy with 100%.
Right.
Like an aging parent you're taking care of. She's demented, that type of thing.
What about you? What about you? Yeah, you personally. Okay. All right. What about you? I know people that are listening, they can't hear, so if you think about something, if you're listening, what you might be suffering from. Okay. And you? And you? Okay. All right. And you know, I can hear you saying, well, of course everybody knows that life is not always going to be perfect. But what he's basically talking about is throughout your life, in many ways, you're going to find a general dissatisfaction. Because you get something, you're going to maybe necessarily want more. But let's go into why the Buddha said the second noble truth. The reason your life can be difficult, and in the Vajrayana and the Mahayana, they talk about 5 poisons, but they're all based on, the Buddha said, the 3 poisons. These 3 poisons can come into 84,000 different combinations to cause you grief. And the most important one of these poisons is moha. This again is English, takes a few more words. And moha means ignorance, bewilderment, or delusion. And why it is the root of these emotions, or the root of that causes you grief, is because if you knew you weren't ignorant, you would know these things and you wouldn't do what you're doing. And you know, if I point to you and say, you know, you're ignorant, that makes people feel bad. The word ignorant in Dharma simply means I don't know any better. It doesn't have anything to do with you being stupid, bad, wrong. I don't know any better. It's like if they took me to go into, do brain surgery. I don't know how to do this. I am ignorant about brain surgery, and you're going to be very lucky that I don't attempt it. But it's interesting. The other part is bewilderment and delusion. And these things kind of fit together. If you don't know something, you are ignorant about something, and you start to think about a little bit of it, you're bewildered. I know I understand a little, but I don't understand a lot. And then sometimes if you're trying to be cute, what have you, you'll become delusional. Well, I don't know this, but I'm going to just say this, so I look good. I don't look like I don't know what I'm talking about. So ignorance, bewilderment, and delusion. That's the first poison. And it's represented by the pig, which seems kind of contradictory because the pig is probably the most intelligent animal. But why they Buddhists use the pig is because they will eat anything and lay anywhere, and they don't really think about themselves or how to take care of themselves. The next is raga, and that is attachment, craving, clinging, and greed. When we become attached to anything, it is going to cause us pain. And the reason it's going to cause us pain is absolutely nothing is permanent. There's nothing in this world that's permanent. Nothing. Does anybody think they know something that is permanent? Okay. Nothing is permanent. And part of the reason nothing is permanent is when we talked about those aggregates, life and you, emotions, everything is a constant state of flux. You can't really attach to anything because that's going to go. Buildings are going to go, homes are going to go, jobs are going to go, relationships are going to end, our health ends, but we attach to things. We want to make it real because we don't want to see things move. And we're going to talk a little bit about permanence here in a minute. When you attach to something, you really hold on and you want it. And when you really start to like it, essentially, or through any of the senses, there's a very good chance you're going to crave it. Now, these can all work on their own, but they do kind of fit in a pattern. If you start with attachment, it can end up into craving, and when it starts to slip away, you're going to cling to it, and when you worry it's going to go away, you get greedy. And you hold on to these things. And it's really important to understand that everything we attach to, we do try to keep it, just don't change. We know kids are going to grow and change, but we don't want part of them to change. Everything's going to change. And I think it's important, after some stuff I went through, it was when I realized emotions to things aren't permanent either. We try to keep a lot of emotions to things. This I'm going to keep. I like that feeling. I like to go back and remember it. And usually we don't remember it right anyway. We are just projecting how we wish it would have been in the first place. And this devesa, it's aversion to not wanting to get, so you're afraid of losing. When you are adverse to something, you have a very good chance of becoming angry. And angry is going to turn to hate. It doesn't always have to, but when you're adverse to something, you don't want to be too attached or too adverse, but all the time, if you've got an attachment issue, you've got an aversion issue with it. Because you've got attachment that's over here, aversion, but the thing that is, what you're attached or averse to is a person, place, or thing. And a lot of times you can be very attached to something and at the same time be adverse. I like the way this person looks. They are exactly physically what I would like to have in a partner. I'm very attached to that. But the person he is and his thoughts and beliefs, I'm adverse to. So you can be attached and adverse, and most of the time they do work together. Part of the time you're attached to something, and then you can become adverse to it. So it's very easy to watch. And I think we all have aversions to something. I have to watch out. If you Facebook, I can become very averse to things. I'm very adverse to Sarah Palin. I have to watch that because truthfully, if you're a Buddhist practitioner, a bodhisattva is your goal, You're supposed to like Sarah Palin as much as you like Dalai Lama. You're not supposed to have. Because what you have to understand is that you're looking at what these people have attached to themselves. It's who they, the essence. There's nobody that is any better or any worse that's walking this planet. Some people do things better, but they're not better people. And what the true Dharma practice is trying to teach you is you're the one that's creating this aversion. You're the ones that, this is, I'm going to attach this, I'm going to, make it solid. I make Sarah Palin out probably much more horrible than she is. She's not really that horrible. I think that ignorance in politics is something that people should examine. The reason they call the bird as part of the attachment is because at this point in time in the world, birds always were seen together, two birds together, attachment. The snake is for the aversion, hate, and anger, because the snake will slither and bite you when you're not looking. And what the Buddha is trying to tell you, anger and hate can become very, doesn't take much to go from anger to hate. So, now why did the Buddha tell you about these things? These keep you from understanding these 5 very crucial things. We talked about impermanence, trying to make something real that is not. Did you ever see the movie Groundhog Day? That would be like if everything was permanent. Every day. Except truthfully, that wouldn't even happen. Think of if everything just stayed the same. You wouldn't grow. Nothing would change. You wouldn't have a different season. It would be like the same. It would cause massive insanity. Impermanence is actually your friend. You can look at it for, bad things end. A lot of times people that are Dharma practitioners, they think about, only the good things end. But the bad things end too. And a lot of times, if you start to understand about your emotional attachment to these things, you can really learn a lot about yourself. You can think of times and places that you did something, and at the time and the place, and how it made you emotionally feel, it was wonderful. And then 3 years, and you change. You are not permanent anymore, and you realize, while that might have looked fun, that was insane, and it really hurt me. It made me to be a very judgmental person. Your emotional thoughts of all these things change. And it was one of the things that helped me a great deal when I got over a very personal loss. I didn't let the memories and the emotions continue to change. I wanted to hold on and make something permanent. And the harder you try to make something permanent, the more you're going to emotionally suffer, because it's impossible. There's nothing you can do about it. The other thing that people don't understand, and that's part of next 2 weeks discussion, you don't understand karmic predisposition. Your thoughts and actions from past lives can and affect this life. And most people have, how many past lives do you think, if you believe in, how many do you think you had? She thinks she's had a lot. How many about you? Fair. How about you? How about you? Talking about 100,000 at the minimum. And we'll talk a little bit about Buddhist cosmology, at least. The thing about it is we really have a very, when we go into the Buddhist belief of cosmology, these human lifetimes, they are so precious, but they are so short. You have places you could be living in animal realms, you could be living in God realms, you could be living in Titan realms, you could be living in hungry ghost realms, and you could be living in hell realms. And not all the realms are right around here. You stop and think about it. If every insect is a sentient being, you're a sentient being, that insect is going to take lifetime after lifetime to even maybe get to a human lifetime.
So you do believe in the level? Because a lot of folks think once you're at the human level, if you do come back, you don't come back as a dog.
No, I'll tell you, Stephen's heard me say this, and I should have said it from the start. Because you are interested, or just have a casual interest in Dharma. but you've just won the lottery. It's like winning the Powerball 3 times. The Buddha was very clear that to become a human being is no small feat. You have done some major, every time you think, I've never done anything well, or I'm this terrible of a person, because you're a person, you've done some incredibly good things.
So the next time you come back as you regress.
Yeah, but it's not that common. A lot of times some of the old monks will try to scare you. If you're really ignorant, you will come back as a pig. It's not so much that. It's what's in your heart. But why you've won the lottery 3 times is to become a human. That's pretty impressive. You've done something. And that's why the Tibetan tradition, they hammer it through your head in day 1. This is a precious life. Don't screw it around. Do what you're supposed to do. But then, if you are born in a place where you can see a Buddha, or that it's not just that there's Buddhism is around you, but there are what are called kelpas, or nature kelpas. This is a period of about 1 million years that there are Buddhas. There are times that there's not going to be any Buddhas. Those are called degenerate and dark times. And there's only one more Buddha that's going to come. And he's not coming anytime soon, but that's Maitreya. That's the Buddha of the future. And what's nice about Maitreya is he's always sitting in a chair, so we won't have to sit on the floor for Dharma practice from that point. So some of you know about sitting on the floor. Yeah, Maitreya. No. Maitreya has already been doing things in subtle levels. No, there's a clown, I shouldn't say clown, but there's this guy that runs around and tells people he's Maitreya, and he's not Maitreya. Maitreya is not, it doesn't have to be. I think you're going to see some other Buddhists. I think you're going to see a female Dalai Lama fairly soon, too. There's been some real issues with women in Buddhism. We're going to talk about. Buddhism has their little issues, too. They're not as bad as maybe some, but they've not been very nice to women, especially the Tibetan tradition. And Dalai Lama is that, and the gay issue is something he's doing a lot about. But this karmic predisposition, Atisha said the karma of the sentient mind it's beyond comprehension. You shouldn't really try to figure it out, because unless you're enlightened, you can't truly figure out karma. But one thing, and we are going to talk about in the next session, is about how your karma is created. There's 4 different distinct things that happen to create karma. But what is interesting that one of my teachers has taught me, and I can see where, there's usually one thing in life that you always struggle with, and it's something that not everybody does. Some people have always had have problem with money. Somebody has trouble with relationships. Somebody has trouble with anxiety. Somebody has trouble with depression, and it makes no sense. Those are karmic predispositions. Usually something that you always struggle with or have a hard time with has something to do with past life. And what's kind of fascinating about that is we do kind of act surprised. But when you stop and think about it, it makes no sense where these things, we always try to find out where they come from. But it's karmic predisposition. Then the big thing is dependent origin. We have this concept that something can just pop up and manifest out of the air. Nothing is dependent. Everything is independent. Everything is dependent. And this is tough for a lot of people to understand. But this is one of the standard teachings on that. See that kind of tacky pillow there? The one with the black on it? I hate this. Well, see, I have no taste. Yeah, okay. Okay, how many people do you think were involved in making that pillow? Origin. This is what this. Okay, just off the top of your head. First of all, there's a little silk in there, so there was probably some insects, and that meant that the insects had to eat something, which were other insects. And then the silk is made. Then you've got, okay, we're going to grow the cotton. Somebody had to grow the cotton. Somebody had to feed the people that were taking the cotton. Somebody had to build houses for them, and those people had to eat. And basically anything that you find, we could probably find 10 million people that were involved, and that's the truth of independent origin. And we don't like that in the West. We don't want to think that we're dependent. It doesn't mean that you're dependent on somebody, but you're part and parcel of things. Everything is connected. And that is one of the things why a lot of people in the West do not like Buddhism, because I don't want to be part of everything. I want to be strong. I want to be above it all. You can't help it. And the quicker that you can understand that, the good part about understanding this is that you can see that connection. When you're talking about, this person is as good as this person, this helps you understand this. Everybody's contributing in one way or the other. Sometimes just doing nothing is contributing instead of doing something on the wrong side of things. But independent origin is really important to really understand. Because when we talk about some of these practices, about Tonglen practices and bringing compassion up through your heart, if you remember this, it is a good starting point for that. The other thing the Buddha talked about was dualistic thinking. Wouldn't it be nice if everything was black and white? It can never be. There is not anything that's black and white, because nothing's permanent. If nothing's permanent, nothing can be black and white. How does that work for you? Do you really think everything's black and white? Yeah. But I think that it's fair to say that there are things that are fairly right. But nothing's truly black and white. And that's called dualistic thinking. When we talk about emptiness, which is the toughest concept of Buddhism to understand, but it helps us when you understand that nothing is black and white. You don't have to, who says because there's good there has to be bad? That's one of the fallacies of Western thought too, is that you have to have a complete opposite of something, and they don't exist. Does everybody have water? Do you want water? Okay. So we have dualistic thinking, and then false sense of the self. And there's something I should have told you. This kind of dovetails into this. One of the reasons the Buddha did not want to teach is because his concept and view was radical. First of all, he said there is no creator. There's no creator outside of yourself, which, the Hindus, that was... But the other thing is he threw out the caste system. And he said, no, the system of you are, that would be permanent. No. The other thing, though, that does surprise a lot of people, he did not want to ordain women. And he said, if I ordain women, it's going to cut off 50 years of Dharma. The Dharma will end in India. Well, and I'll tell you, though, it wasn't so much that, because the other thing, he did eventually ordain women, but he never would ordain what was called pandangas. And throughout history in India, whoever is on the outs, whoever is considered a bad person, whoever is considered immoral, it's never been the same, but they were just lumped in and called pandangas. But the reason the Buddha could not really, he would teach women, he taught cannibals and murderers. And I'm trying to put women in that category. But the thing about it is that why he couldn't really, he played around with the ordination of women, and his aunt who raised him was the first woman that was ordained. And this is true today, that every sect of Buddhism, you're taught very well. When you come into a country or into a land, you have to ask the guy that's running the show if you can be here. So the Buddha, if he went someplace, he'd say, hey. And that was one thing that he did learn from his father. His father was a great politician, and he did pick up some of the finer points. But, he would have to go and say, can I, teach here on your ground? And they would say, yes, but you do have to follow some of the customs. And women were not, so that he kind of, and pandangas, never. Now, some people have gotten thinking that gay people were pandangas or people that dressed up in opposite sex were pandangas. There is some truth to, they weren't transgendered then because but there is some truth to that. But it didn't mean he didn't teach them and he didn't like them or he said they were bad, but you had to follow some of the rules to be able to set himself up in certain these places, because he did not ever stay in one place. The Buddha was traveling all the time, especially because of the different rain seasons. So he was in Nepal a little bit. He was in India. There was some talk about Pakistan, but I don't quite quite believe that myself. Let's see. Well, I'm not Mr. Where did that thing go? Oh, there it is. I'm used to a mouse. This thing with the finger is... Yeah. So back to the sense of self and that little tangent I went on about what he believed about a creator. But Buddhists still do not believe in a soul in the traditional sense. You're something. This is where we get into the false sense of self. There are some people that very incorrectly think Buddhism is nihilism. Nothing exists, it's all an illusion. Part of that's true. If everything is impermanent, and when you talk about impermanence too, as a scientist, everything's basically light. So you know nothing's real to that degree. But there's no soul. There's not. If there's no creator, there's no soul. It's called anat. It doesn't mean you don't exist, but the part of you that you think is a soul is not quite really a soul because there's no God in his mind. And by the way, the wonderful thing about Buddhism, the Buddha said, don't believe anything I said. Try it out, and you don't have to swallow it hook, line, and sinker. Please.
My mother had an experience with my grandmother's death.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom is not crazy. She doesn't say things just to say them. She's almost 90.
Right.
So she's got a lot of wisdom. She's wonderful. She's leadership as well. She saw my grandmother 2 days before she passed with my mother. And she saw my grandmother leave her body twice.
Well, the thing about it is, as a Buddhist, I believe that entirely that's true. You can look at it as an aspect of somebody. An aspect. Instead of saying a soul, it's an aspect, a part of them. You know, because when we talk later about the 5 aggregates of what you really are, that will make more sense. Because you're not what you think you are, but you're not that limited too. You know, makes sense. Time's an illusion. Einstein pretty much had that figured out. I believe it. I've seen some things personally that make monks. I have seen monks in temperatures 20 below zero in their robes generating heat. Makes no sense. These people have been meditating since they were 4 years old. They've got a few lessons on us. But phenomena like that, it usually can be explained, but not in necessarily the traditional ways. It doesn't mean necessarily that there's a soul, but there's an aspect. Sometimes the better way to look at it is the vernacular is different. I don't want to argue with somebody that, say, I believe there's a soul. And I say, well, it's only an aspect. If you want to call it a soul, that's perfectly fine. If I want to call it an aspect, that's fine. That's like with these 3 schools. There's some very serious differences. The other 2 say, yeah, the Pali Canon is great and wonderful, but we've got our own canons on top of it. We're only talking about the Pali Canon with them. Their ideal is the Arhat. That means you're going to become enlightened. They believe, even though you start with the Buddhist practice, it's 10, 20, 100 lifetimes before you'll be an Arhat. They don't give you the good points that easy in this school of Buddhism. The Mahayana and the Tibetan especially, Tibetans say you can become enlightened in 1 lifetime.
That's what I'm saying. My mother's been around a lot because her to have witnessed that. Not everybody. My father was there. He didn't see it.
People do have gifts.
She is gifted.
Well, and you know about Tibetan tradition much? Okay. Everybody knows Pema's beyond Tibetan. Did anybody see the movie Kundan? It's the story of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And part of the Tibetan tradition, and His Holiness will tell you the only reason he got out of Tibet alive was they have what's called the Nuchung Oracle. And you saw the oracle in this movie. He goes into a trance, and he wears a big headdress, and he speaks in a very strange dialect of Tibetan, and he tells you prophecy. And there is some truth to Tibet prophecy, and I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but there's a great movie coming out I'm hoping to maybe get so we can see it, but it's called When the Iron Bird Flies. The person that brought Tantric Buddhism to Tibet was Padmasambhava, fully enlightened being. I'm totally convinced Padmasambhava was a Buddha. And he made prophecies, and one of his most stunning prophecies is he said, when the iron bird flies and the horses run on wheels, the people of Tibet will be scattered like ants in the wind, and the Dharma will flourish in the land of the red-faced people. So, Padmasambhava didn't know what an airplane was. He might have been enlightened, but nobody knew what that word was. So that was airplane, iron bird, horses running on wheels. And about that time when airplanes and cars came to Tibet, the Chinese occupied Tibet and all hell broke loose. So he prophesied this in about 1420. So there are some things. It's Einstein loved Buddhism. He forgot to put the quote on there. I mean, that was, if he had to pick a religion, that was what he would pick. He said that it transcended the issue of a creator, and basically Buddhism is the science of the mind. And that was one thought. I forgot where I was going to go with it. But now we're about the false sense of self. You do exist. It's not that you don't exist. But what and who you think you are is severely flawed. And one of the most sad ways that we all do is how terrible we treat ourselves and how terrible most of us talk to ourselves. Not everybody, but a lot of people, the yammer that they hear in their head is only coming from them. And it's all due to ignorance, attachment, or aversion. We can become very adverse to ourselves, or we can become very attached to ourselves. And neither one of them is going to work. Now, that was the second noble truth, was why you suffer, and that was kind of all depressing. But the third noble truth is suffering can end. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to go through all of this. And next week we will talk about the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth noble truth, and that is how to end suffering. So at this point in time, let's just talk. Questions or comments, or have some sort of discussion. I might even sit down. Oh, okay, we're just, well, at least it'll be taped. What questions do you have? You seem to be, throw some out.
I'm struggling with what I have seen in my own life with many religions that we are friends with people with, from Catholicism to Jewish.
Mm-hmm. I was raised, I was part of that group for a while.
I mean, they attended to, you should say. We struggle with reincarnation, what happens when we die, my mother's hearing death now, which is kind of brought this whole to a head, and she's just looking forward to it because she misses my father so much. They had an incredibly wonderful reign of 63 years together.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother and I try to tell him, maybe Dad's done, maybe he's reincarnated to somebody else. He says, no, that's not the promise. The promise is done, united.
I've been,
Does anybody really have the answers? Not to cast me down here.
well, when we get to the point of emptiness, that's pretty much saying anything's possible. I have been on a lot of panels with religious people, and one of my favorite people is he was a former Monsignor in the Catholic Church.
Former Monsignor, huh?
Yeah, he got in trouble because he's, talked about some things that He's a wonderful person, you know. And then he was done with that, and he's married to a wonderful woman. He's you know, we've had some really good discussions about, you know, what literal in the Bible. I mean, he showed me how the Noah's Ark story actually was true. It made sense. And I just look, see, you know, that was the one that made no sense to me. But he said that, you know, they've proven in this part of where Noah was supposed to hang out. No, 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 not that at all. That they could find that there was floods about every 7 years. The whole area would be underground. Noah was not some, you know, wise man talking to God. Noah was somebody, and they have found this. This is true. They found some records about it. Noah was somebody that built ships, and he would sell places for you to sit so you wouldn't drown. And you had to come up with a lot of money for Noah to save you. And then if you look at what the animals, you know, 2 of every animal, the only animals he really was concerned about were what the Jewish faith considered animals. So it was about 14 pair that he took. So everybody thought the world ended. Well, if you, as far as you could see, is the flood, you think, well, the whole damn thing's flooded. But see, that's the thing. If you open your mind to these things, and he kind of would be looking at these things, and he taught me a lot about how if you look at Bible passages, you can tell whether the Greeks wrote them because it's outrageous and everything's flowery. And, you know, these are the types of things he wanted to have discussions about. And he and I were talking about heaven. And he said, well, what do you believe happens? And I said, I believe if you pick your religious faith, when you die, you're going to experience that. If you believe in hell and you think you're bad, you're going to go to this insane hell. Right here. That's the Tibetan tradition in a nutshell. That's, you know, Tibetans believe you spend 49 days in the bardo. That you remember the Buddha was sitting under the tree for 49 days. Tibetans believe that you. Probably, yeah. But the Karmapa, the last Karmapa, there's a new Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa, a wonderful, wonderful teacher being. He died in Chicago. And when a High Lama dies, their heart's still warm for days. And they were shocked because he was at Mount Zion Hospital in Chicago, and the doctors first of all could not understand this man that was dying from this incredibly painful cancer. He was laughing and joking the entire time. He never acted like he was in pain. And they let them and said, you know, they had to break hospital rules because you're not supposed to let a corpse stay there, but they let him stay in that bed for 7 days. And it was only after 7 days his heart, because the Tibetans believe as long as the heart's beating, your consciousness, just because you're stiff, doesn't mean you're dead. But back to this thing about, you know, it's in your mind. I believe that if you believe in the Catholic heaven, you'll go to the Catholic heaven and you'll spend some time there. But as I was explaining to the Monsignor, I said, you know, Tibetan tradition and the Buddhist tradition, our sense of time is huge. We talk about kalpas, which are millions of years. And, okay, so let's say you go to heaven for a long time. It's like vacation. If you're on vacation for a month, don't you kind of get tired of vacation after a while? That's what I think you kind of do. You get tired of heaven. So you go reincarnate and you do it all over again. That makes sense to me. In my twisted world. Yes, and oh yeah, that's the thing about you choose your parents, but one thing you don't get to do is blame your parents for your problems. No. You pre-choose that. That's why. Yeah, she chose you too. But no, that's true. And you know, I'm trying to not go into anything outside of the Theravada tradition because they don't care about these things. They are very, you just study and meditate and bring stuff to us. But Tibetan tradition does talk about a lot of those things, and they talk a lot about don't blame your parents. Your karma and these terrible things that happen, maybe your parents helped facilitate it, but it's your karma. And you know why that's good? Because if you don't blame anybody, if you blame your mother, then your mother's got to change for you to feel whole. When you understand, this doesn't mean that you know you're all on yourself. You got the Sangha, you got your teachers, what have you. But when you know that you're the responsible party, then you can make the changes. It can be scary and frightening, but that way you don't have to blame. what we believe. Over here, what are you people thinking? You're bored? Okay.
Can you talk more about, you were talking about karma and there's always something that you're always trying to do, like you're depression, anxiety, or relationships, like just expand a little bit more.
Well, the thing about it is that you can't say, well, I was really terrible in a relationship in a past life. But there are certain causes and conditions that have manifested here now. Depression is one. I firmly believe depression is past life. I've suffered from depression, severe depression. You know, I've had my fill. I don't know if many of you know my story, and maybe later we can talk about that. But and the thing about it is later when we talk about karma, there are ways to purify and change your karma. You don't just have, it's not set in stone, because nothing is permanent. How can your karma be permanent? See, that's a lot of times what you need to look at this, and more of not the adverse, but more of the pleasant side, is a lot of these things that seem like they're depressive. They really offer you a lot of hope and faith. Not faith, that's a bad word. They give you a lot of choice and chances. You know, and there's some people who say, well, the only reason people believe in past lives is, you know, so they can do bad things and come back again. The amount of people that believe in past lives, and there's been, you know, studies with kids and stuff, but you're never going to completely prove it. But, you know, you're never going to completely prove heaven or God or anything. It's not possible. Now, did that answer your question about the karma, and what was the other thing?
It was just, I was like, you expand a little bit more.
Did you understand, or do you want more?
What's your thoughts on the purifying the?
Well, in the Tibetan tradition, part of what you do is called nundro. Before you take the serious teachings, you have to do 100,000 prostrations, and you do 100,000 of the mantra of 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva. Most Tibetan people that practice the tradition, they do 20 mantras of the 100-syllable mantra at night before they go to bed, or they do the 35 confessional Buddhist practice. And those can change your karma. The other thing that you can change negative karma is be a good person. You know, and that's just, don't give people shit is what I tell you. Most people, you know. Well, it's, the Dalai Lama says is, if you can't do nothing else, just don't do no harm. You know, if that's all you can do, do no harm. And when we talk about karma, it's created in four very set steps. And I'll just briefly, since you mentioned it, first thing is what you were thinking before you did the action, what you're thinking while you did the action itself, and what you were thinking of after you committed the action. So it can get there. You've got 4 things. And depending on how strong each of those things are, shows the karmic condition and the karmic response. And so that you can see that's kind of tough to figure out. You know, what was I really thinking? And the truth of what you learn to do, and we're going to talk about in the Eightfold Path, is you develop mindfulness. You slow things down. When I'm doing this, and that's why I've tried to really comprehend what you're thinking. Now, what about you? I was an agent and a professional athlete, and to be an agent, you have to be a professional liar. You know, you're a babysitter and a liar. There's some things in my life that I am not real pleased about. But the thing about it is that's not permanent. If you can constantly think about those things, you're attached and you're holding on to them. And a lot of times we do that simply because we're, and I don't mean you, but ignorant. I don't know any better. I'm scared of something. A lot of times just the fear of the future will keep you clinging on to something. So, you know, the other thing is you hear a lot about forgiveness. I've got to forgive this person. And forgiveness is the key to cleaning up karma with anybody. You know, a lot of times you've been doing this dance with somebody for a lifetimes. You know, you're the bad guy, they're the good guy, and then back. And until somebody forgives the other person, you're going to continue to do that dance for another 200 lifetimes. Same people, except, well, it's not always. You know, when you've had that many lifetimes, the Tibetan teaching is you need to treat everybody like that they were your mother once, because there's a good chance they were at one time. Isn't that scary? But that's not permanent. And see, if you think about those things, and we're talking about forgiveness, people are very good usually at forgiving others, but they really suck at forgiving themselves. And there's a process we're going to talk about forgiving ourselves with karma, because it's got 4 steps to it too. But the first thing to really understand is the longer you keep those thoughts here, you're holding on to them. And a lot of it's because, you know, sometimes we think, because of this Judeo-Christian background we have, that if we are mean to ourselves, or we continually think about, we did this wrong, that it sometimes gets purified. It doesn't. It makes us insane. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What questions you have? When we talk about like Vajrasattva practice, that's purifying some of that. But see, that's the secret. And you know, people, well, I'll go into a little bit with this karma thing, because it's fun. It's one of the funner parts of this, but it's profound. The worst thing you can do is think, I'm doing this because I'm going to make good karma for myself. You probably shouldn't do it. You know, the Bodhisattva ideal is the Arhat ideal is for the Theravada school. The other schools, we believe in the ideal of the Bodhisattva, that I will come back, I don't care how many lifetimes, till every sentient being is enlightened, or on the verge of it, and we can all go together. And you know, to me it makes sense, because why would I want to be enlightened while everybody else around me is miserable? So, you know, that karma thing, don't do things just because you think it's going to be good karma. But in some ways, you've heard the term in some organizations, fake it till you make it. If you have to fake it for a while, go ahead. But when you develop a true sense of altruism, that's what, if you want to know what the Buddha and the Dalai Lama will tell you, if you want to really be happy, do something for somebody besides yourself. And to me, you know, I had one teacher. I went through something. I will tell you a little bit. So I think you're the only one that knows much about me. I was doing very well. I was a manager agent. I was a professional athlete. I had a great job where I only had to go to Japan 1 week a month to work. And I adopted a little boy. And that was what my life was all about. And I watched him get hit by a car. And I didn't do very well. I drank myself to where I lived on the streets for 2 years, and that's something you don't really ever want to do. I was in the hospital to the point that they sent me a credit bureau. I technically owe about $850,000 in hospital bills for being in the hospital, and I spent so many days in county jail in a blackout, shoplifting booze, urinating in the street, and that's one of the reasons I've started this foundation or this nonprofit, because in any given night, there are 750 to 1,500 gay male inmates in jail. None of them have jobs. Most of them have a substance abuse problem, and they're in and out of there until they finally commit usually 10 shoplifting charges, and you go to prison. And the gay community doesn't like those people so much. It's not pretty. And we want to do some work. That's what this nonprofit is. And it's not just gay people. We want to help anybody with substance abuse problems, anybody with homeless issues, but also with education and job training, because if you don't deal with all of those, nothing's going to change. But what happened is I finally ended up I had this wonderful judge in Beverly Hills just for, if you ever get in trouble, bad trouble enough to be put on probation, you will see the same judge all the time. And there's this judge in Beverly Hills. He liked me. He's, I don't know what's wrong with you. He understood the situation, and he never, he wouldn't send me to jail. One time he sent me to jail for a year, and I was all upset. And with jail overcrowding, I spent 7 days. 7 days in jail was considered a year, so I was all upset thinking I'm going to spend a year in jail. I spent 7 days. But 7 days in jail, you don't ever want to go to jail. And I decided, they put me in this rehab that was having financial problems, and then they had me in this house where 6 or 7 of us lived, and one day they came and they said, y'all have to leave. We've ran out of money. I had no place to go. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. There's 2 things. We talk about deities. There was a deity called Tara, and I think Tara saved my life twice. One time when I was out on the streets, I thought, I can kill myself. And I was scared of heights, so I couldn't jump off anything. But I decided I'm going to drink myself to death. And I was at the Vaughn's over there in Santa Monica. And I stole one of those big bottles of vodka. And I went and I said, if I can drink half of that, maybe you just drink as much as you can, and you can you can check out. And I remember drinking, and I remember passing out, looking up, and I just saw the clouds. And the next thing I knew, I woke up at St. John's Hospital with tubes down my throat. I had passed out right on the ambulance ramp at St. John's Hospital, and if I wouldn't have passed out there, I'd be dead because I had forgotten how to breathe. And so with this house, I had no place to go, and I said I'm going to stay there. I found out my mother had all my furniture picked up, so I had some furniture. And the bank was going to try to evict me, but I noticed they were kind of nice about it. So we went to court, and I had some, because the state had paid for something, I thought I might have ground to stand on. And the guy from the bank said, could we interest you, would you stay in this house for us? And I said, well, what's the catch? And they said, well, because of the economy, we're not going to sell this house for a long time. And if you could just stay there to make sure nobody, strips the paint or strips the pipes. And I stayed there for about 6 months. And they kind of were sad to see me go. But that's that. And then when I went to Tibet and Nepal, that's when I really decided the only thing that has ever made sense to me was Buddhism. I'd been a fairly half-assed practitioner until that time. So I decided I'm going to get serious about this. And I've come up with a theory about what causes addiction, and that is what I use and what I've used to help other people get rid of addiction or to make it less. My technique and teaching has been used at UCLA and other places. It does not contradict AA, but AA doesn't like me because I don't believe in God, and they won't. Our center is going to have an AA meeting and a Buddhist AA meeting because I want everybody to have what they're going to be comfortable with. But if they say higher power and I say, well, it makes no sense. But I mean, truthfully, AA has about a 2% success rate.
I know, that's how I know.
Yeah. I think truthfully, and we're getting way off subject here, but I think the reason AA works is because most people are lonely and they get to hang out with other people. That's why it works. And it's structure. One of the things that if you only get over addiction, it's structure. So, any more questions? You haven't said anything. Well, then you were talking about parent children, right? Okay. So nobody has any other questions? How many people meditate? Meditate.
Not in the traditional sense.
Okay. What type of meditation do you do? What kind do you do? Okay, and what kind do you do? Sitting, do you do single focal point or insight? Okay, and you? And you too meditate? Well, and you do little? Okay, then we're going to... Where'd it go? Okay, what we're going to do is a 5-minute meditation. And in my view, you need to learn single point meditation before you can do anything else. Because what it does is it stabilizes the mind. And there's 4 components, and you can get very complicated with this, but for now, you know, it's like Maitreya. You sit like that, or you sit with your feet firmly on the wall, on the floor. That is not a Tibetan tradition. And you sit as straight as you possibly can. Now you sit in a half lotus. If you can do that, I can do that. I've tried that full lotus, and I'm not going to get that done, I don't think, in this lifetime. And some people don't know what to do with your hands. You put your hands here, or you can put them here, whatever's comfortable. Now, most people try to tell you you need to keep your eyes kind of open. I don't think the eyes are that important, especially in the beginning. If you close your eyes, that's fine too. And the only instruction for this, some people want to see something, I think it's much easier, is to do nothing but focus on the breath. Now this is one thing. The secret to meditation, in my view, is not too tight and not too loose. You want to be relaxed, but you don't want to be where you're drifting. It's single focus. I want to focus enough on the breath. And what you do is you put the tongue on up here by the teeth, and you breathe. It doesn't have to be big, deep breaths, but it's nice breath, you know. And you breathe in. If you can breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, fine. If you can't, there's no problem with that either. And the thing about it is I'm going to just follow the breath. And what you will find, some of you, I don't want to put thoughts into your head, but some of you will get what is called the monkey mind. You will see, my mind goes all over the place. I'm sitting here and I'm doing the grocery shopping. I'm thinking about, when I was in high school, and I have but see what this does is by you stabilizing your mind, it's not that you're trying to shut it off, but you start to become aware of how your mind works. Buddhism is the science of the mind, so we need to kind of get our mind in some sort of trajectory, and that starts with many different types of meditation. But when you can focus on something, then these other meditations make more sense and are more successful. And all you do, so you sit there and you breathe, and if you do, you focus on Vaughn's. Just go back to the breath. Let it go. Don't go, let it go. Not too tight, not too loose. And don't get upset. If you are thinking about 1,000 different things, that's only one meditation session. That's not all. There's sometimes I think, Christ, if I could do that 3 more times, I'll be enlightened. Perfect meditation. And there's other times I might as well be coloring on the wall. I've got my mind, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And it's just what you look at is, okay, this is an experience. It's not permanent. So let's just do that. And if you do meditation, you can do as much and as long as you want. I personally believe you don't need more than 20 minutes a day. Some people, now if you have a teacher, one of your teachers might say, no, you need 2 hours, or you need this. But I find it at first, because meditation can be so overwhelming to people, it sounds so boring, but do 5 minutes at a time. Do 5 minutes 3 times a day. If you are a meditator, you obviously have your practice, so but if you're new at it, 5 minutes at a time. And then when you get better at it, we're going to talk about a different type of meditation. You do it while you're in line at the grocery store. You do these little quickies, different places. That works too. So let's just do that, and so sit up straight. You can close your eyes or look at your nose, is what they tell you to do. Roof on the top of your back behind your teeth. You sit up straight and just focus on the breath. Just focus on the breath, in and out. If a thought comes, just let it go. Don't hold on to it. Your mind doesn't want to hold on to anything anyway. Just let it go. Always just go back to the breath. All right, slowly come. Open your eyes. Very slowly. And just move around a little bit. I always find that helps me just to move. How was that? The benefits of meditation outside of the Dharma, there's no way you can deny it. They're still finding out more and more what good meditation does. And there's many different kinds of meditation. There's mantra meditation, there's insight meditation, there's the advanced Tibetan practice, there's the Mahamudra meditation. So those instructions have to be given to you by a lama. So, any questions at all? Well, what we're doing right now is we are supposed to have had our 501c3 paperwork back.